This, believe it or not, is winemaking. An elaborate alarm system wakes John Stitchbury whenever the temperature in his vineyard falls below zero. He uses a low-tech instrument to find a layer of warm air and then flies in a giant fan heater to make sure that not a grape falls victim to the frosts that threaten every spring. Just one example of the ingenuity and lateral thinking of the world's most isolated wine producers, the no-nonsense Kiwis.
New Zealand, where the air, the water, and the landscape are as crisp and clear as the country's most famous wine. Sauvignon Blanc from the Marlborough region, where vines are being planted so fast, they're calling it New Zealand's Klondike. Most Sauvignon Blanc leaves me pretty cold. There's so little to it. Just the reek of cat's pee on a gooseberry bush, loads of acidity, and a little fruit if you're lucky. But that's my problem, not the Marlborough vine growers. In just 20 years, from scratch, they've developed such a following for their particularly fruity style of razor-sharp Sauvignon Blanc that they reckon they're the only New World wine producers actually beating the French at their own game. How it came about is a remarkable story.
Marlborough's on the northern tip of New Zealand's South Island. Although it's only 20 miles by sea from the nation's capital, it could be on another planet. Not long ago, this valley was mainly occupied by sheep. The grazing was so poor that, among farmers who could scarcely make ends meet, suicides were not unknown. Ironically, it took an Australian to put the place on the map. David Honan, already a highly respected winemaker in Western Australia, flew into Marlborough in the early 80s as a result of a chance meeting with some New Zealanders.
A wandering band of 3 Kiwis, a jovial bunch, I must say, called into my winery in Margaret River, and over half an hour or so we tasted a number of wines, and I particularly wanted to show them a 1982 Sauvignon that I had in barrel. I felt that there was something special and I could create quite an impression with these guys. And they were suitably impressed. But then they went out to their car, out to the hire car, and they brought back 2 bottles of wine and pulled the corks. They were Sauvignon Blanc. And I'm afraid they stole the show. They just blew me away. They were lovely, pungent, incredible characters. I mean, they just raised the hairs on the back of my neck. So I guess having bundled them into their car and given them directions to the nearest pub, I was hooked. I was bitten.
The very next harvest, David Honan flew to Marlborough to buy some land and grow Sauvignon. No easy task, as it turned out. It took a change in the law before the New Zealand government would allow an Aussie to get his hands on Kiwi soil. And then, with no winery of his own, his first vintage had to be made in the back of a lorry. He called it Cloudy Bay after the view from the plain. Wine lovers all over the world now clamour for it, but in those early days he had to hide its origins.
In Australia, 10 years ago, there was definitely a prejudice against New Zealand wines, and I think that had been well earned. The Kiwis in the 50s and 60s made some pretty diabolical stuff, and I'm sure they'd admit that today. So we de-emphasised that we put New Zealand on the back label and Cloudy Bay on the front label, and I think quite honestly, by the time the Aussies had finished that first bottle, they had no idea at all that it came from New Zealand. So they had no chance to sort of to judge that wine with their prejudice.
Cloudy Bay's success was partly due to its name, with its clever suggestion that here, unlike most New World wine regions, it's really quite cool. In fact, the New Zealand climate is extremely variable, which means that wine producers here are allowed to use the full range of possible adjustments to the basic wine recipe. They can irrigate if there hasn't been enough rain. If there hasn't been enough sun to ripen the grapes fully, they can add sugar during fermentation to make the resulting wines more alcoholic. They can add acid if it's been a really hot summer and the grapes lose their natural acidity. Or, more commonly, they can take acid away by adding chalk, for instance, if the grapes are just too acid. This complete freedom, along with the chance to make a quick buck, has encouraged all sorts of people to get in on the act.
Blenheim is Marlborough's main town. It's a weird mixture of hangovers from the past and full-blown economic explosion. Everything here shrieks new, 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 but it's all very British and genteel. There are only 21,000 inhabitants, but 130 estate agents. Land prices are soaring as everyone now wants to cash in on the world's most sought-after Sauvignon Blanc. To be a wine producer here, you don't need a winery or even a cellar. All you need is a label. Everything else can be rented. Typical is Jackson Estate, whose powerful premium Sauvignon Blanc has been a wow in Britain, but seems to come from this collection of rusty sheds. The only barrel here is the one at the end of Stitchbury's bird scarer. John Stitchbury has no wine background at all. This buccaneer was trained as a ship's engineer and runs his vineyard like a modern sea captain, from a bridge linked by fax and phone to his consultant winemaker, 1,500 miles away in South Australia. The wine's actually made in a contract winery down the road. He's plugged into all possible weather reports, even from the pilots of passing aircraft, so he can tell when to pick and when to call in the whirlybirds. He can tell you the temperature in the vineyard, in the air above it, even in the containers taking his wines halfway round the world. Yet he wouldn't have a clue what temperature his wine should be served at. At one time, he scratched a living helicopter poaching deer off the local mountains. He tried exporting garlic to Fiji, but a coup there left him with a massive debt they would settle only in holiday vouchers. Then came Cloudy Bay's success, and, hey presto, a new career.
But you knew nothing whatever about vine growing, did you?
Yeah, but sometimes it's a little knowledge is dangerous, as my grandfather always used to say. You know, you always get yourself into trouble. So by having a clean approach to it, we had to start from scratch, and it meant that we didn't necessarily have to do the things wrong that Europe had done for years and this sort of thing. What says that they're right? You know, there's no books really written on growing grapes in Marlborough, or hadn't been at that stage. Everyone's making a buck out of it now, aren't they?
Were you a wine drinker before you started vine growing?
No, my pleasure came from underneath Crown Caps. You gave it a twist and it went...
And what about now?
I enjoy a tipple with a good old bit of venison or something like that. Oh, I didn't say that, did I, Fred? Sorry, no wonder he's disappeared. But, no, sitting down at the dinner table, yes, but not swirling wine around during the daytime. No, I don't enjoy it.
On the other side of the world, in the Upper Loire Valley in central France, is the traditional home of Sauvignon Blanc, the twin towns of Sancerre and Puy.
The big difference between any French wine region and its New World equivalent is the appellation contrôlé system, France's pride and joy. Any bit of France that's established a reputation for its wine, or brandy, or cheese, has its own appellation,
that prevents other people from using the name by carefully setting out the exact area that's entitled to it. With the protectionism of the appellation, though, comes this great stack of regulations. To benefit from the commercial advantage of using a well-known name like Sancerre, for example, local vine growers have to restrict themselves to one of only 2 permitted grape varieties. They have to reach certain very carefully prescribed minimum ripeness levels. They're limited to a certain maximum yield. They can only pick when the authorities say they can. They have to plant according to specified distances. They have to prune according to the regulations, and a whole stack of other restrictions. About 40% of France's wines are entitled to the words Appellation Contrôlée on the label. The rest are regarded as a sort of substandard product by the French, called vin de table, or table wine. Other European countries are busy devising their own versions of this much-admired system, even though it tends to lace wine producers into a straitjacket. The last person you'd expect to support such restrictions is the wild man of Puy, Didier Dagueneau, the region's enfant terrible. Didier, who insists on calling everyone tu, not the more formal vous, is Puy-Fumé's most passionate protagonist. He's just come back from a holiday canoeing in the Yukon. He's a true loner, separated from his wife, disowned by his father, who lives in the same village, thrown out of many a bar for brawling. He has little time for his neighbours, most of whom he thinks aren't fit to be called winemakers. They just don't have his dedication to how things actually taste.
Tu fais la cuisson comme ça toujours?
Oui, c'est la spécialité du chef.
Mais tu ne bois pas vos vins blancs sur la viande?
Non, je bois du vin rouge. Les vins blancs, on les garde pour l'apéritif, la charcuterie ou le fromage. Surtout le fromage.
Donc, blanc, rouge, blanc.
Ouais, pas de problème.
Et tu es encore vivant?
Oui, ça va. J'espère.
Et Didier, tu trouves que tu es coincé vraiment par les lois de l'appellation contrôlée?
Non. Non, parce que je pense qu'on va, on va au-delà de la législation. Et moi, ce que je pense, c'est que l'INAO devrait justement être beaucoup plus strict. Et on a tout à gagner en France tout le monde cherche à nous imiter. Les Américains commencent maintenant à dire on va peut-être faire aussi des appellations contrôlées, ressortir le terroir, des choses comme ça. Donc on veut chercher à nous imiter.
Et qu'est-ce que tu penses, par exemple, des Sauvignons de Nouvelle-Zélande?
Les Sauvignons de Nouvelle-Zélande, ceux qui m'ont été donnés de goûter, de déguster, là, c'est des grosses entreprises, c'est des industries. On goûte des vins qui sont corrects. Mais pour moi, c'est des vins qui n'ont pas d'âme. C'est des vins qui sont techniquement bien faits, mais qu'on peut faire aussi bien en Californie, qu'on peut faire n'importe où ailleurs. Pour moi, il n'y a pas de terroir, il n'y a pas d'extraction, il n'y a pas de cœur. C'est ce que j'expliquais tout à l'heure, c'est des produits de consommation. On fait des vins pour être bu, pour être consommé. Mais je pense que le vin, c'est autre chose qu'une boisson. Quand on a soif, on boit de l'eau. Quand on veut se faire plaisir et qu'on veut approcher quelque chose, on boit du vin.
He claims he bought this World War II ambulance to give him useful height for negotiating the muddy vineyards of Puy. His other car is a Lotus Elan. His latest passion is this Shire horse, very useful for ploughing his organic vineyards, but he hasn't quite worked out how to drive it yet. Amazing to think his wines can sell for £70 in a top restaurant.
Arôme très très intense.
Oui.
Et tu fais du vin pour qui? Pour quel but?
Dans quel but? Moi, je fais du vin pour faire plaisir aux gens. Je suis marchand de bonheur. C'est joli comme métier, je trouve. Et moi, je veux que les gens, quand ils boivent mon vin, ils soient enthousiasmés, qu'ils prennent du plaisir, que ce soit un bon moment de leur vie. C'est comme la bonne cuisine, c'est comme la belle musique, c'est comme la belle peinture. Je pense que le vin devrait être considéré comme de l'art au même titre que la peinture ou que la musique. Ça peut être de l'art. Malheureusement, il n'y a pas beaucoup de gens qui travaillent dans cet esprit. Sur 100 vignerons, À mon avis, il y a 80 cancres. C'est des gens qui souvent, c'est un peu le drame de la viticulture française, c'est des gens qui sont héritiers. C'est pas un métier qu'ils ont choisi, ils le subissent plus qu'ils l'ont choisi. Ou alors quand ils l'ont choisi, c'est qu'ils se sont rendus compte que ça pouvait être juteux, que ça pouvait rapporter beaucoup d'argent. Et ils sont partis dans la facilité en fait. Ça c'est 80% à mon avis. Sur les 20% qui restent, il y a des gens qui sont laborieux, qui ont envie de faire des choses qui sont bien, qui sont assez bien faites, faire plaisir aux gens. Et je sais pas, il y a 1 ou 2% de génie. Souvent, c'est des gens qui sont un peu écartés parce qu'ils dérangent, parce qu'ils font autre chose. Mais c'est ceux-là qui sont proches de la vérité. C'est mon point de vue. C'est pas parole d'évangile, mais c'est ce que je pense. Ta santé. Je pense que le Sauvignon, c'est un des plus grands cépages au même titre que le Chardonnay, au même titre que le Riesling. On fait des grands vins blancs de Sauvignon. J'en suis persuadé. Toi, non. La première fois que j'ai lu ton livre, j'avais vraiment dedans contre toi parce que quand j'ai vu comment tu disais le cépage Sauvignon, ouais, j'ai jamais vu de choses étonnantes. Pour moi, c'est l'équivalent des plus grands vins blancs.
C'est très très grand, oui, c'est très bon.
Ta santé.
À la vôtre.
This sure ain't typical Sauvignon, Didier.
Ça sent très très bon. Hein. Tu as faim, j'espère, hein?
Oui, il n'y a pas que moi. Super, ça te va comme ça? Ça sent bon.
Pour moi, parfait. J'aime le sang même. Hein?
Oui. Parfait. Je vais chercher une bouteille de vin rouge.
Et je peux pas attendre, hein? C'est très très bon.
Dagenham certainly wouldn't describe Jacques Lurton as thick. In fact, he's one of the sharpest I know, pushy and successful as they come, and perhaps the most famous of a new breed known as flying winemakers. Lurton's in Chile, far from the cold hand of French wine law, to make Sauvignon Blanc, the thing he does best, I reckon. Which is hardly surprising, since his home, 6,000 miles away in Bordeaux, is Chateau Bonnet, where his father André is the most famous Sauvignon maker of the region. Not that Jacques sees much of it nowadays, nor of his girlfriend Françoise, who has baked his birthday cake. Chateau Bonnet's ruled with a rod of iron by the autocratic André Lurton. André and Jacques' relationship has always been prickly, perhaps because they're just too alike. Jacques started off making his own Bordeaux wines. When it looked as though they could be denting sales of his father's, he was told to stop. Then Jacques had an idea. With his brother François in charge of the admin at home, he would travel the world, dispensing French-accented winemaking expertise. And so was born the flying winemaker.
Le Ridel, grande classe. Chic. Ça, c'est chic. La carafe toupie de Ridel, grande classe.
These days, even when he's at home, Jacques' mentally thousands of miles away. Working in 5 different time zones, from Moldova to Mendoza, he puts his name on so many wine labels that even he can't quite keep track. His deal is to select promising vineyards, offer to buy all the crop, and vinify it in the owner's cellar. but the owner has to know his place.
I'm controlling all the winemaking, and I'm the only one in charge of this winemaking. The owner, his participation, it is to follow what we say to him. It is to bring the grapes to the cellar, and from this stage, he doesn't touch, I will say, the product. We touch everything. We clean our tank. We do everything in the winery like if it was our winery.
But if that vineyard owner's already making wine, he must feel pretty insulted.
Yes, it's a shock at the beginning. It can be a shock when you come to see someone and you say to him, but I think what you're doing is not good. Us, we're going to make it differently. We want to make it another style, or it's not, I mean, it's only to say that we're going to make it better. But we have to be very diplomatic. We cannot say it this way. It's, what we have to do, it is to force the entrance to be in and to show them what we can do, because when they've seen it, they all commit definitely to what we are doing. But we have, at the beginning, it's a lot of effort to come and to say, okay, we would like to do it, we want to do it this way, we're going to make it different than what we are doing, because if you do it yourself, we won't buy the wine. We only buy the wine if we do it ourselves. So sure, it's a shock for the owner.
And what are the main differences then between your approach and the usual one?
Most of the growers, they look for safety. So they pick early to avoid the rain or to avoid the botrytis and many things. They don't take any risk. And us, we push them to take the risk.
Jacques is now just one of hundreds of flying winemakers. Scores migrate north from Australia's wineries every September. He's off to check up on one of his team in the south of France. A rather short journey for him.
A flying winemaker is to describe someone who is going, who is moving from his place to another place to make wine. And everybody is able to do it. But I think not everybody is able to have the right feeling in every place to express the quality of the grapes of this place. It's easy to make a basic wine everywhere you go. It's not easy to make the wine which is expressing the real character of the grapes from the place where you are. And I think, I want to escape from this image.
And no wonder. The Lurtons of this world are heavily criticised for making all wines taste the same. I think it's a passing fad. The locals will simply pinch their modern techniques and make better wines themselves. Lurton, on the phone, arrives chez Olivier Mondeville, another rather fraught relationship. Mondeville sells trailer loads of his own wines to Marks & Spencer, but Jacques has little truck with him.
He's not what I call a pure winemaker himself. He's not an oenologist. He has the help of local laboratory or local oenologist who comes just once a week to check his wines. So it's not a sufficient control about the winemaking to achieve the quality we want to achieve. It was sufficient to achieve the quality for the bulk market, I will say, he was selling to, but it's not sufficient for a well-finished product.
The two winemaking teams operate at different ends of the cellar. Jacques' man is the usual itinerant Antipodean.
And when you mixed them, how was the fermentation going? How long did you wait to mix
2 days.
You waited 2 days. That's good. These people are looking for the minimum cost winemaking. They never talk about yeast or enzymes or fining agents, even about cleaning products because they're too expensive. It's like they don't want to spray the vineyard because it's too expensive. You see in terms of flavor, and it's very reduced, so that's why, but you put some DAP. It was very mature.
Mondeville and his father stand ignored while Jacques briefs his assistant in English, a language neither of them understand.
50 parts, which is you should triple. The owners of the places where we were at the beginning are very surprised by the time we are working, and sometimes very not disappointed, very angry about it, because they have to stay longer than they used to stay, and they don't like it anyway. They don't like it working like that. It's too. They think we are mad sometimes, working that long. It is, for the winemaker, much more interesting. When you leave France or Europe, and going to countries where there is no appellation control at all. Almost everything is permitted, and a winemaker can express his full ideas of winemaking without having any restrictions. Chile is great. Chile is fantastic. It's really a fantastic place. They like us very much, which is very important when you go to a country. It is to show to the people, first of all, you like them and you try to speak their language. It's very important to do not impose a language. I try wherever I go to adapt myself to the language and to the mentalities. It's a very important, and after that you are accepted.
¿Qué echas tú en términos de aeración de viña? ¿Tú has sacado horas o hojas? No.
This cathedral in stainless steel will be Chile's biggest winery. Designed exactly to Jacques' specifications and funded by the brewers who quench Chileans' thirst, it'll produce wines made expressly for European and North American palates. It's a monument to fresh, crisp, technically perfect, inexpensive Sauvignon, of which Chile has loads, even though lots of it's rustic Sauvignon vert rather than the more refined Sauvignon Blanc. Despite this minor inconvenience, Chile now seems set to beat the New Zealanders at what they thought was their game, with a little help from a Frenchman. I must admit that thanks to Didier Dagenot, I have now tasted a truly thrilling Sauvignon Blanc. But I still think that no matter where Sauvignon's planted, it does tend to produce basically the same sort of wine, which is great if you're a fan of this grassy, gooseberry sort of flavour. It also makes Sauvignon Blanc a great starting point for learning to recognise the flavours of individual grape varieties. And whatever my reservations about choosing something as tart as Sauvignon to drink on a cold winter's night in London, I must say that on a hot day like this, there's absolutely nothing as refreshing.